Howdy, folks. Radical Rusty Red State Refugee here, and I just got to take a moment to rant about the top 10 reasons I left the Handmaid state. Idaho used to be known as the Gem State, but as far as I'm concerned, from now on, it's the Handmaid state for these 10 reasons. First of all, Idaho is one of the 13 states that have enacted what I refer to as forced birth slavery. Idaho bans abortions from the moment of conception. All abortions are banned in the state of Idaho, with just a couple of exceptions. You can get an exception if there's a danger to the mother's life from the pregnancy, or if the mother is a victim of a reported rape or incest. Now, let's be clear about this part of reported rape or incest, because if you are a young woman who's just been raped by your father, maybe reporting that isn't something you want to do. Maybe you don't want daddy to go to jail, or maybe you don't want daddy to kill you or beat you or harm you in some way. So forcing a woman who's already been victimized through rape or incest to have to report that to authorities, where oftentimes through the court system, she is forced to relive that trauma over again, is just cruel and unusual punishment. And as far as this victim of rape or incest or a possible threat to the mother's life, the exception only applies in the first trimester. There are some women who make it through their first trimester without knowing they're pregnant. And if that happened to be from a rape, incest, or could possibly kill them, it's too late to get that abortion in the state of Idaho. And even if you can get that abortion in the state of Idaho, the doctor is only covered with what's called an affirmative defense to the charges of committing an illegal abortion. An affirmative defense means that you are still charged with the crime. You still get arrested. You still get booked, mugshotted, fingerprinted, and you still have to go to court. And then at court, you can try to prove, oh, well, the mother's life was in danger. She was a victim of rape or incest, and it was less than 3 months within the pregnancy. If you can't prove that affirmative defense, you're still guilty. And of course, putting up that affirmative defense costs money. You have to go to court. You have to hire lawyers, take time out of your work. And Idaho even went so far as to try to ban healthcare providers in the state of Idaho from referring people for abortion out of state or telling them how they could get the mifepristone abortion pills. Now, this was struck down by the courts in a case called Conant v. Walters, which was the precedent for this, happened to come from medical marijuana. Back in the Clinton administration, they tried to ban doctors in California from merely talking about medical marijuana. The Supreme Court decided in Conant v. Walters that you can't restrict a doctor's free speech rights in that way. And that precedent also applies to seeking abortion care. So at least doctors in Idaho can still talk about it. But one of the ways that makes Idaho unique as the Handmaid state is its creation of the nation's only so-called abortion trafficking law. This is a law that says any adult who helps a minor obtain an abortion, either by going out of state, getting one in state, or accessing abortion pills, without their parents' permission, is committing a felony for which they can be locked up for 2 to 5 years. Now, there are numerous problems with this. First of all, again, in that case of incest where the minor needs the abortion, they might not want to get parental consent. The parent might not consent, or the parent might harm them in some way. And we also run afoul of the Constitution's protections of equal protection under the law and the right to travel. In the states of Oregon and Washington, minors can get abortions without their parents' consent. In Washington state, it's any age. In Oregon, it's age 14 and over. So Idaho is trying to restrict the equal protection rights of their minors who would perfectly legally be able to access abortion in those other states. And the third law in their anti-abortion trifecta is a civil abortion lawsuit law, similar to what Texas did with the bounties. In this case, any immediate family member of the pregnant woman, mother, father, grandparent, sibling, spouse, aunt, uncle, cousin, the woman herself, any of these people, should they decide to, can sue the doctor who provided the abortion within 4 years of that abortion happening. So again, suppose we have the woman who gets pregnant, has the abortion, and then let's say a couple years later, she has a religious experience and joins a new religion, decides abortion's terrible, and so she's going to go back 2 years later and sue that doctor who gave her the abortion. And in that lawsuit, statutory damages of $20,000. Right off the top, 20 grand, plus any other damages, plus court costs, plus attorney fees. And so this is what faces any doctor in the state of Idaho who tries to provide an abortion, or anybody who tries to help someone get an abortion could be subject to these civil lawsuits. But if you try suing on the other side of the law, let's say you think this is a bad law and you want to go to court to say it's unconstitutional, you don't get damages. The law specifically forbids the awarding of any statutory, monetary, court costs, attorney fees type of damages to someone who would sue over this law and find it unconstitutional. So if you want to try to overturn this law, it's coming out of your own pocket. Now, let's say that because there is no abortion care in the state of Idaho, you're forced to have this child, and this child grows up and it gets injured, or it gets a disease of some sort. And you could treat this disease. You could take the kid into the hospital and they give him some amoxicillin to be fine. Or it's a broken leg and they could set it in a cast and your kid would be fine. But you joined that religion. You joined a special religion that says doctors are evil and hospitals are evil. And if God really wanted your kid to be healed, all you need to do is pray for it. And if Jesus wants to heal your kid, well, Jesus will heal your kid. And if Jesus doesn't heal your kid, you're not on the hook for anything. That's right. No manslaughter, no negligence, no child abuse. According to Idaho's faith healing exemption, if you let your child die from an easily treatable injury or disease because your religion said so, that you should just pray it away, you're not on the hook for anything. You get off scot-free. You have committed no crime in the state of Idaho. And this has been the law in the state of Idaho for 50 years. In 1972, this was added at the behest of a religious group called the Followers of Christ Church, which I happen to know a little bit about. My ex-wife, her grandfather, was the co-founder of the Followers of Christ religion. And she has numerous cousins and friends of the family with little infant headstones in graveyards all throughout the state of Idaho and Oregon. Little babies with less than 1 year of life, tombstones you'd expect to see in a pioneer graveyard from the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s even, with tombstones that read death dates in the 2000s. There have been over 200 Idaho children who've been left to die because of this faith healing exemption that the Idaho legislature still refuses to overturn. And not only do children die in the state of Idaho thanks to these laws, but mothers die in the state of Idaho. Back in 2019, the state formed what was called the Maternal Mortality Review Committee to take a look at how many women were dying in childbirth. Now, in 2019, they found that 18.1 per 100,000 Idaho women died in childbirth. By 2020, that number had skyrocketed to 32.5 per 100,000. 32 and a half pregnant women dying in childbirth per 100,000. That puts us at a rate worse than Uzbekistan and Syria. And Idaho's rate in 2020 was double the national average. So in 2023, the Idaho legislature let the funding for that committee expire without renewal. In fact, Idaho now is the only state in the nation not tracking whether or not a baby kills its mother in childbirth. Now, once you have that child in the state of Idaho, you're going to need some postpartum health care. And in the American Rescue Plan that was passed by President Biden and the Democrats, they allowed the states to expand that Medicare coverage for a year without a waiver. It used to be you get it for 3 months if you're on Medicare, and then after 3 months, you had to fill out some paperwork to get more of this child care. But with the American Rescue Plan, we're just going to let the states expand Medicare for a full year after childbirth. Idaho refused that expansion. Free money from the federal government to give out to mothers for health care for a year for their newborn kids, Idaho refused it. And Idaho is the only one of those 13 states with the draconian abortion bans to refuse that money. And in 2020, 11 mothers died in childbirth in the state of Idaho. 8 of those mothers were covered by Medicare. Another part of the American Rescue Plan passed by Biden and the Democrats granted $36 million to the state of Idaho to support childcare providers. $36 million of free money for childcare, and another $2 million to help families that were dealing with the child welfare system with education and support. The Idaho legislature also rejected those funds, and it was only after a massive public outcry and lots of demonstrations that they finally relented and took that free money from the government to help childcare. Suppose you can't get an abortion, your kid grows up and turns out to be transgender. Well, we know the state of Idaho is not going to have any of that. It's one of the states that has passed a ban on transgender health care. Basically, they're saying no minors can get puberty blockers or hormones, even though the American Academy of Pediatrics and all the medical organizations say that kids that are transgender, kids that are suffering gender dysphoria, it's much better for them to delay their puberty. It's much better for their mental health. Well, to hell with what the doctors say. Idaho says no puberty blockers, no hormones. In fact, the state even went so far as to ban gender-changing surgery, top surgery and bottom surgery, which has never been legal in the state of Idaho. I guess they just had to make extra sure. And this is a felony worth 10 years in prison. Yeah, 2 to 5 year felony for providing abortion, 10-year felony for providing hormone blockers. Of course, the state of Idaho has never been a friendly place for LGBT people. They also tried to pass one of those bans on minors and drag shows, men performing in drag. That got bogged down because the Senate didn't want to deal with the constitutional questions in the First Amendment, but they wanted to. And suppose your kid grows up to become one of those kids with intractable epilepsy. You remember in 2013, about a decade ago, Sanjay Gupta had that thing on CNN with the little girl from Colorado. She had these terrible, terrible epileptic seizures, and they gave her some CBD oil with no THC in it or a very scant amount, can't get you high in any way. And then that little girl was miraculously healed. And after that happened, starting in about 2014, states all across the nation, diverse states like Utah and Indiana and Alabama, were passing these laws to allow little kids like this girl who had epilepsy to be able to get this non-psychoactive CBD oil. You remember that? Idaho was the only state to veto such a law. That's right. Butch Otter, the governor of Idaho at the time, in signing his veto statement, said he was worried about the threat to public safety by allowing little epileptic kids to use a CBD extract that can't get anybody high. Yeah, only state in the nation to ban CBD, and still the only Western state without any sort of medical marijuana program. A cancer patient who has a joint in their pocket in the state of Idaho is subject to a misdemeanor crime punishable by up to 6 months in jail and a $1,000 fine. And yet, Idahoans are flocking across the borders of Washington, Oregon, Nevada, and Montana, bringing home millions of dollars of weed every month. But guns? Oh, guns, have at them. We got no problem with guns in the state of Idaho. In the state of Idaho, a child of any age, literally any age, can handle a gun with a class and a hunting adult. So, to give you an example, when I was 11 years old, I went into hunter education in the state of Idaho. Took a little class. It was like a day-long class, I think it was. And after that day-long class, I got a little piece of paper that was my little youth hunting permit as an 11-year-old. With that little piece of paper, and so long as I was in the presence of an adult who had an active hunting license, I could be in possession of any gun but a handgun at the age of 11. I could be walking around with an AR-15 so long as I'm walking along with someone else who has a hunting license. Yeah. And after age 12, you just need a note. From age 12 to 17, as long as it's not a handgun, from age 12 to 17, a minor in the state of Idaho can possess and handle any gun so long as they've got a written note from their mom and dad. Yeah. And once you hit age 18, there's no limits at all. You can have any gun you like, any magazine you like, anywhere you like, any way you like. You want to go to the store with an AR-15 strapped to your back? No problem. You want to go to the park with a couple of Uzi pistols on your side? Sure, no problem. No training, no permits, no licensing, no nothing. But we're worried about CBD oil because of public safety. These laws have led to a phenomenon that I refer to as red state refugees. People who just have to flee the state of their birth and the land of where they grew up, their alma maters, their businesses, their friends and family, because they cannot be subject to these laws. There are numerous hospitals in the state of Idaho that are no longer performing any maternity care. If you're pregnant and want to have a baby in North Idaho, there's like one city you can go to. You can go to Coeur d'Alene, or you have to go out of state just to have a baby. 5 of the 9 full-time maternal fetal health specialists in the state of Idaho, state's only got 9, 5 of them have left. 5 have left the state. There's 4 left for a state of 1.7 million people. Idaho is in the bottom 10 when you look at maternal health rankings, child health rankings, public education rankings. And then, of course, if you're a woman, you're LGBT, it's definitely not the state for you. And so you have to leave. You have to flee, leave your friends and family behind just because you can't live in these handmade states. Well, folks, I think it's time we start putting pressure on some of those handmade states with some boycotts. And when it comes to the state of Idaho, what better thing to boycott than Idaho potatoes? It's a little thing, but we got to do something. I'm Radical Russ, and that's the rant.